Hi, I'm Rowenna. I inherited my grandmother's house, her legacy, really, along with $1.2 million she quietly secured for me. But just days after her funeral, my family walked in like it was theirs. No warning, no shame. They told me to pack my things. "You're out by Friday," they said, holding papers they faked. But it wasn't just the house they tried to steal. They tried to erase me, called me unstable, rewrote the obituary, turned cousins against me, questioned if I even belonged in the bloodline. How do you fight back when the people undoing you call it love? And worse, what do you do when you realize they've been planning this far longer than you've been grieving? The air in Sedona always had that dry, copper-scented stillness after a funeral. I remember the way the gravel crunched under my boots when I stepped out of the attorney's office, clutching a manila folder that felt heavier than it should have. Everyone had left in silence. No hugs, no parting words, just quiet looks passed between cousins like secrets. Inside that folder was my name, stamped in bold, final ink across everything Grandma ever owned. $1.2 million in assets, the house, the land, the retirement accounts. All of it, to me. You'd think that would have felt like a gift. But the moment Mr. Dallinger, the family attorney, cleared his throat and read it aloud, I felt the air shift. Zinnia's lips pressed into a smile so tight it looked like it hurt. Vera didn't blink, just stared down at her lap, hands folded like she was trying to pray it away. Nobody congratulated me. No one met my eyes. I stood there trying to smile through the tension in my chest, but it was like walking barefoot across glass. I wasn't being celebrated. I was being watched. Later that evening, Zinnia found me in the backyard of Grandma's house, standing under the mesquite tree that still had her wind chimes dangling, clicking like bones. "Well," she said, her tone coated in honey so thick I could smell the artificial sweetener. "You were always her favorite. Guess she really went with her feelings." I didn't respond. What was there to say? Thanks for not throwing a fit in front of the notary? Instead, I nodded and stared at the sky, turning to embers behind the red cliffs. 3 days passed, and I tried to make sense of being home without Grandma in it. The furniture still smelled like her lavender sachets. Her reading glasses still sat on the armrest. Every creak of the floor felt like her ghost moving room to room. Then came the dinner. Vera hosted it at her place. A few extended relatives, some potluck dishes, and tension you could cut with a butter knife. I brought lemon bars because Grandma used to make them. No one touched them. Halfway through the meal, Vera, calm as you please, looked around and said, "Of course, Rowenna's just keeping the house warm until we figure out the best way to divide things." The word "we" snapped something deep in my ribs. I didn't correct her. Not then. I just swallowed the words like dry toast. Then Uncle Barry chimed in, chuckling. "I mean, obviously she's not planning to keep it all. That wouldn't be fair." Fair? Like the 20 years I spent driving Grandma to doctor's appointments didn't count? Like I hadn't given up weekends, holidays, and a social life to be the one who showed up? I looked at them, these people who had come for Easter dinner and posted photos for likes, then vanished till next December. They all nodded politely and kept chewing like I wasn't there. I smiled politely, the way I always had, but inside, the floor cracked open. That night, I sat at the old writing desk in the living room, flipping through the deed copies and the trust papers. Everything was legal, signed, sealed, filed. I was the sole heir. And yet, they looked at me like I was a squatter in my own home, like this was some temporary arrangement, a mistake they were giving me time to fix. I went to bed with that thought repeating, when did I become the outsider in a house I never left? Grandma used to say, family doesn't always know how to love you. Sometimes they only know how to need you. That quote echoed harder now than ever before. At some point past midnight, I got up to get water. The floor felt colder than usual. As I passed the hallway, a breeze brushed my leg. The front door was unlocked. My breath stalled. I hadn't left it that way. I stepped forward slowly, the old floorboards beneath my heels giving me away. Then I saw them, muddy footprints, not just one pair, two, tracked from the door to the hallway and then fading toward the kitchen. My hand gripped the doorframe, not from fear, but from the wave of realization. They'd already started moving in. I didn't sleep much that night. After seeing those footprints, heavy, wet, unmistakably human, I sat on the couch with the porch light on, staring at the front door. I kept telling myself it could have been me. Maybe I forgot to lock the back door. Maybe I brought something in and didn't notice the mud. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, fog draped over the hills like a damp sheet. Everything smelled like wet earth and old regret. I moved slowly, waiting for the kettle to boil, staring at the muddy tracks that faded halfway into the kitchen. One set veered toward the pantry. Another stopped near the sink. There were 2 coffee mugs in the drying rack. Clean, but not mine. I hadn't used those since before the funeral. I opened the pantry. A box of crackers was open, not how I left it, and I caught the faintest trace of Zinnia's perfume, sugary floral, always just a little too strong. It didn't feel like a break-in. It felt like a rehearsal. They were warming up to something, testing the waters, seeing how far they could go before I'd say something. By noon, I had the house to myself again. I took pictures. Muddy footprints, the back door latch half-turned, pantry shelf, the coffee mugs. I forwarded them to Sonia, my attorney, with a short note. This isn't a maybe anymore. Later that afternoon, Zinnia dropped by like nothing had happened. She showed up with a bag of lemons, a smile that didn't touch her eyes, and that same perfume wafting behind her. Hey, figured you'd want these. Grandma always made lemon water after a storm, remember? She walked in without waiting for an answer. I didn't stop her. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe and asked, "Did you come by last night?" She blinked, like she didn't expect me to start there. Last night. Or yesterday. The back door was unlocked. There were muddy footprints. She laughed. A little too light. "Ro, it's been raining for 3 days. Maybe you left it open." I didn't blink. "And the mugs in the sink?" She waved it off. "I mean, I did pop in the other day to grab some of my things. It didn't seem like a big deal. I figured, it's all family." That word, family, used like a permission slip. "You figured you didn't need to ask?" She tilted her head, like I was the one being unreasonable. "We didn't think you'd mind. It's not like we're strangers, Ro." No, they weren't strangers. That was the problem. Strangers respected locks. Zinnia eventually left, humming like we'd had a lovely visit. I locked the door behind her and double-checked it this time. That evening, I went through the drawer in the hallway desk, Grandma's drawer, the one she always kept organized down to the paper clips. Inside was a white envelope marked Memorial Program. I hadn't seen it before. I sat on the floor and opened it. The cover read, "Celebrating the Life of June Collins," hosted by Vera and family. Below that, the names of everyone who'd helped coordinate. Zinnia, Aunt Charlotte, even Cousin Terrence from Michigan, who hadn't visited in a decade. And then my name, misspelled, listed as Rowenna Collins, granddaughter, distant relative. Distant. Like I'd been mailed in from another zip code. I flipped through the pages. Every photo included everyone but me. One of them had clearly been cropped. I recognized the original frame. I'd taken it. I was in it. I wasn't anymore. I didn't cry. That would have been too generous. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, every name, every exclusion. Then I emailed them to Sonia. My message was brief. They're not just erasing my claim, they're editing me out of existence. It wasn't paranoia. It was a plan. When people invade your home, it's unsettling. When they do it with a smile and a monogrammed casserole dish, it's psychological warfare. By the time I made tea, I realized something else. This wasn't going to stop at documents or dirty footprints. This was a game of territory, and I was the only one playing by the rules. The next morning, I was sitting by the window, still in my robe, when a white van pulled into the driveway. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out, holding a clipboard. He knocked on the door and greeted me with a smile that tried too hard. "Morning, ma'am. I've got a work order here to replace your locks. Signed by Vera Collins. You want me to proceed?" I didn't even blink when the locksmith asked if I wanted the work done. I just stared at the clipboard in his hand, then back at him. "You're telling me Vera Collins requested a full lock replacement on a house she doesn't own?" I asked, calmly but directly. He hesitated, glanced at the paper again, and shrugged. "Says here she's the property administrator. I just go where the ticket sends me." I stepped onto the porch, took a slow breath, and met his eyes. "You're not touching a thing. This property is under legal trust, and you don't have clearance from the trustee. Me." I said it without flinching. He nodded, backed away with a polite mumble, and got back into his van. I watched until his brake lights disappeared down the road. Then I went inside and locked the door. Every bolt, every chain. By early afternoon, I was back at the piano bench, the one Grandma and I used to sit at after her evening tea. There was something about that spot. How the light filtered through the lace curtains. How her old lamp buzzed faintly with age. It made memories feel louder. My phone buzzed beside me. One new voicemail, Clara. She hadn't called since the funeral. I hit play, expecting condolences. Instead, her voice came through hushed and tight. "Rowenna, I don't want to stir anything, but your grandmother told me something a few months before she passed. She said, 'Clara, watch the back door. I have a feeling someone's going to try and slip through it again, just like always.'" I replayed that line twice. Again. Just like always. That wasn't just a warning, it was a pattern. It meant Grandma had seen this coming. She didn't just trust me with her will, she trusted me to hold the line. And I had. That thought gave me just enough energy to face what came next. I didn't have to wait long. Around 3 p.m., Vera and Zinnia arrived uninvited. No knock. Just the sound of the screen door creaking open and the soft tap of their heels on tile. I didn't greet them. They walked into the kitchen like they had a right to it. Vera held a manila envelope like it was a gift. She set it on the table, her voice as smooth as the laminate beneath her fingers. "We went ahead and started the transfer process," she said. "House deed's already in Zinnia's name. You have until Friday to get your things in order." Zinnia gave me that same smug grin she always used to wear when she beat me to the passenger seat in Grandma's old Buick. I picked up the envelope and slid out the document. Quitclaim deed. Filed out of county. No notarization. Fraud on paper, dressed in formality. I looked up. "That's not how law works, and you know it." Zinnia leaned back against the counter. "Law is just paper, Ro. Family's bigger than that." There it was. The moment where delusion wrapped itself in sentiment and called it tradition. I didn't argue. I simply walked out of the room and into the study, closed the door, and locked it. Inside, I printed 2 new copies of the trust agreement, highlighted every critical line, sent digital backups to Sonia, uploaded one set to a secure drive. Then I opened the voice memo app on my phone. "They think Friday is the deadline," I said quietly. "They don't know I've already drawn the line." The sun dipped low by evening. I made tea, but didn't touch it. My nerves were steady now, not shaky. Focused. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and moved through the house, checking locks like a ritual. As I reached the back hallway, I heard it, metal creaking, the front gate. I froze. Then a shadow moved along the hedge. My fingers found the edge of the bookshelf and reached behind it. I didn't grab a flashlight. I grabbed the folder with Grandma's trust. I woke up to the sound of gravel shifting outside the window. Not the wind, not a bird. Rubber tires crunching slow and deliberate. I stayed still for a moment, holding my breath the way people do when they're waiting for something they can't name. The sound stopped. A car door shut. I pulled on a hoodie over my pajama top, walked to the front door, and peered through the blinds. A man in a gray work shirt, utility belt slung low on his hips, was standing on the porch holding a clipboard. His van sat at the curb. No company logo, just plain white. Too plain. I opened the door halfway. Can I help you? He flipped the page on his clipboard. I'm here to change the locks. Got a work order right here, authorized by Vera Collins. I stared at him. She said she's the property administrator, he added, tone trying to sound helpful, but strained like he knew something was off. Hang on. I didn't close the door. I left it open just wide enough to let the message sink in. I walked to the study, grabbed the dark blue folder from the desk drawer, labeled neatly with gold foil. Trust authorization, May 2024. When I returned to the door, I didn't raise my voice. I held up the folder like a courtroom exhibit and looked him dead in the eye. If you so much as touch a screw on that lock, you'll be participating in a felony. This property is held under an irrevocable trust. I'm the trustee, and I'm willing to call law enforcement right now to clarify that if you'd like. He blinked once. His hand dropped from the clipboard. No, ma'am, he said quickly. No trouble. I'll cancel the job. I waited until he got back in his van, reversed slowly, and turned the corner before I shut the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't need to. I picked up the phone and called Sonia. They're escalating, I said. Then we'll get louder, she replied. After that, I didn't waste time. I pulled the flash drive from the drawer, one I'd labeled in red ink, Final Asset Protections. On it were every form, every notarized sheet, every audio file where Grandma had said clearly, over and over, this house was mine and mine alone. Truth on a USB stick. I drove into town with that flash drive in my glove compartment like it was state evidence. I parked near the courthouse and went into the small legal print shop across the street. The man behind the counter, probably no older than 30, scanned everything, printed 2 sets, and looked at me with a half-curious smile as I notarized every sheet. Looks like someone's been busy, he said, stamping the last page. Just trying to stay ready, I said. He handed me the folder. Well, you're not the first one in this town trying to fight off vultures, but you're the first one who brought receipts thicker than a phone book. I didn't smile. I just nodded and left. From there, I drove to the post office. I addressed one envelope to Sonia's office and the other to Claire, an old college friend in Flagstaff who worked in legal compliance for a real estate trust. She'd said once in passing, "If you ever need a witness outside the family, I'm your girl." At the time, we were talking about bad boyfriends. But it applied here too. Back at the house, the wind had picked up. The old oak in the yard shook like it knew something was coming. I sat in the kitchen and stared at the table where Vera had dropped that envelope days earlier, like she was offering me something instead of trying to take it. That night, I tried to read, but my eyes wouldn't hold still on the page. Around 8 p.m., I decided to call it a night and lock everything down. As I opened the front door to grab a package Amazon had left, I noticed a second envelope beneath it. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a delivery notice. It was a folded real estate flyer. The photo on the front was of my house, taken from the sidewalk, early morning light glinting off the red tile roof. My curtains drawn in the living room. The agent listed on the bottom was Zinnia. She had printed flyers. She'd listed my house. The photo on the flyer was mine. The name underneath wasn't. The letter came mid-morning, slid through the front mail slot like any other delivery. The envelope was thick, stiff, and carried the kind of weight you don't feel in your hand, but in your spine. Legal weight. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The seal from Yavapai County. The header read, "Petition for Involuntary Guardianship." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Some other Rowenna, some other family. But the pages were clear. Vera and Zinnia had submitted a claim that I was mentally unfit to manage my affairs. They cited emotional instability, erratic isolation, and financial misjudgment. They attached photos, one of me sitting by the piano at 2 a.m., taken through the window. Another of a Facebook post I'd written in a grief support group about not feeling strong after the funeral. Words twisted, ripped out of context, and paraded as proof. They were trying to declare me legally incompetent. I sat down at the kitchen table, read every line. and didn't cry. I just grew colder with each word. They weaponized my grief, I whispered. They turned my quiet into instability. I picked up the phone and called Sonia. She answered on the second ring. Hey, I just saw your email from yesterday. What's going on? They're trying to put me under guardianship, I said, voice level. There was silence, then the scrape of her chair through the receiver. You're kidding! They filed it 2 days ago. I got the notice today. Send me everything right now. This isn't about taking your house. They're trying to legally erase your capacity as an adult. By noon, I was in her office, finally meeting her face to face. Sonia was everything her emails had hinted at. No nonsense, practical, direct. She wore black slacks, a plain blouse, and no jewelry except a silver watch that ticked louder than I expected. She laid out the counter strategy like it was a military maneuver. We start with the trust. Then we build a timeline. Every visit you made to your grandmother, every expense you covered, every month you maintained this property, documented. We include medical receipts, texts, photos, everything that proves you weren't hiding, you were showing up. What about the guardianship? I'll file a motion to dismiss. We'll challenge standing and intent. And we make it very clear that this is retaliatory, not protective. She leaned in, eyes sharp. They're banking on you staying the quiet one. I suggest we surprise them. That evening, just as I finished scanning more documents into a file for Sonia, my phone buzzed. A group text. Vera had sent it to every extended family member we had. Cousins, uncles, people I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. It read, I raised her alone. I gave her everything. This is how she repays me? Greed has no conscience. The message burned hotter than I expected. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I forwarded it straight to Sonia with a single line. This is where they start turning the family. The house was quiet when the sun went down. I made tea and sat by the window, trying to catch my breath between thoughts. My hands weren't shaking. Not anymore. If they wanted a courtroom, they'd get one. But I wasn't the one on trial. I'd spent my life believing that silence kept things peaceful, that letting people walk over you meant they'd eventually feel sorry enough to stop. But that was a child's logic. Adults weaponize that silence. They call it cooperation and smile while they tighten the noose. Around 10:45, as I was shutting off the living room light, I noticed headlights across the street. A car, parked, engine off, lights dimmed. It didn't move for 15 minutes. The next night, it came back. Same spot. Same silence. But this time, someone stepped out. I didn't touch the voicemail for days. I saw it, sitting unread in my inbox. It's timestamped just a week before Grandma passed. But every time I opened the app, my thumb hovered, then closed it. I wasn't ready. But after the guardianship petition, after that message from Vera trying to paint me as unstable, I needed to hear something real, something rooted in someone who hadn't spent the last month trying to erase me. So I hit play. Rowenna! Grandma's voice came through, thin, tired, but unmistakably hers. If you're hearing this, then they're circling. I trusted you for a reason. This house is yours. Protect it. There was a pause like she was catching her breath. Then quieter but sharper. They love the house, but they never loved what it stood for. I sat frozen on the couch, fingers gripping the phone so tight my knuckles cracked. Then I saved the audio, renamed the file June Final, and backed it up twice. One to a flash drive, one to a locked cloud folder. It didn't stop the ache in my chest, but it reminded me why I was still standing. Later that afternoon, I decided to walk off the tension. I drove into town, parked near the Saturday market, and let myself blend into the crowd. The smell of kettle corn and sun-warmed fruit wafted through the stalls. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal again. Then I saw her, Zinnia, at the honey vendor, laughing too loud, hand on some man's shoulder, like she was playing hostess to a town that had never belonged to her. And on her wrist, glinting gold in the sun, was the bracelet. Grandma's bracelet. The one she gave me on my 30th birthday, wrapped in velvet with a handwritten note. It's not the value, it's the weight of memory. I froze. I walked up slowly, just close enough for her to see me. She turned mid-laugh, her smile faltering for half a beat before she straightened her shoulders and smirked. That's mine, I said, nodding toward the bracelet. Zinnia didn't blink. Was. Grandma gave it to me before she passed. You must have forgotten. The woman next to her shifted awkwardly. The vendor looked down, pretending to organize jars. I stared at her, at the way she wore it like a trophy, like she'd earned it. But I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I turned and walked away, each step cementing something deeper inside me. Back home, I snapped a photo of the bracelet on her wrist from the market. Thank God for Zoom. I added it to the folder labeled Zinnia Incidents, right next to the real estate flyer and the fake deed scans. Then I forwarded everything to Sonia. 15 minutes later, she called. This is good, she said, voice low and focused. Not legally, necessarily, but for tone. It tells a story, and that matters. I asked, do we use it? We don't build a case, she replied. We document a pattern. That night, I didn't sleep much. The house felt too quiet, too clean, too ready, like something was being prepared without me knowing it. And then morning came. The sunlight poured through the front curtains as I padded barefoot to the porch to grab the paper. That's when I saw it. A realtor sign, planted dead center in the lawn. There was a brochure taped to it, and Zinnia's name was listed as the seller. I didn't think it could get more personal than them trying to take my house. I was wrong. The day after I found the realtor sign planted like a flag on my lawn, the ripple effect hit. It started quietly, one cousin texting less, another leaving a message unread, but by afternoon, it was a wave. My cousin Ellie forwarded screenshots from the family group chat. Vera and Zinnia had been busy, laying down a new narrative. According to them, I wasn't just ungrateful. I was unstable, manipulative, dangerous. She isolated Grandma, one message read. Another added, she's been twisting things since high school. One aunt chimed in. She turned the will behind our backs. I knew something didn't feel right. And then, the kicker. A text from Aunt Celia. We're keeping things low-key this weekend. Just immediate family. I stared at it, rereading the phrase, just immediate family. Apparently, inheriting a home made me non-immediate. I put the phone down, heart hammering but face blank. It was one thing to be contested in court. It was another to be erased in private. They weren't just trying to steal property. They were trying to rewrite who I was. I printed every screenshot, hole-punched them, slid them into the blue binder marked Evidence, Phase 2. I called Sonia. They're seeding the family against me. Good, she said, without missing a beat. Let them get comfortable. We're not ready to pull the thread yet. I don't want to fight them on Facebook. We won't, she said. We'll fight them in court, with signatures, not status updates. Later that afternoon, I drove into town. I needed groceries, but mostly I needed to breathe. I told myself, just in and out. Eggs, milk, don't make eye contact. But Sedona is small. It doesn't take long for whispers to find you. Near the dairy aisle, I heard it. You ever notice she doesn't look like any of us? Someone said, voice low, but not low enough. I always wondered if she was even really Vera's kid. The words hit me square in the gut. I turned my head slowly. It was my cousin Ruth, mid-60s, always wore hats like she was allergic to direct sunlight, leaning toward Uncle Marcus. Neither looked at me. They didn't need to. I left the cart in the aisle and walked out without the eggs. Back home, I sat in the car, hand still gripping the steering wheel. My mind jumped back to when I was 9, asking Vera why my last name didn't match my siblings'. She said it was because my father had insisted on it. Only now did it register that the answer never felt complete. This wasn't just character assassination. It was an identity assault. They weren't content with questioning my inheritance. They were questioning my blood. And I realized something then. When people can't steal what you have, they try to prove you never belonged to begin with. I wasn't going to let them succeed. That night, I sat with Sonia's voice in my head. Let them go deeper. So I printed the new quotes, clipped them to the others, and started outlining names. Who said what, when, how it connected. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I planned. I wasn't chasing peace anymore. I was chasing precision. The next morning, I ran errands. Post office, gas, quick drop by the office supply store. When I returned to my car, parked downtown on a side street, there was something under my windshield wiper. A folded flyer. The same real estate listing Zinnia had posted last week, but this one had been edited. My photo was still on it. Me watering the roses in front of Grandma's porch. But someone had taken a red marker and scratched a thick line through my face. Saturday afternoon arrived hot and heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I spent the morning wiping down the living room surfaces that didn't need cleaning and aligning chairs that didn't need adjusting. I didn't do it because I cared how it looked. I did it because I needed something, anything I could control. At 4 p.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Vera, Zinnia, Uncle Terry, and Aunt Celia, standing like they were arriving for a polite brunch instead of a confrontation. Sonia was already inside, seated near the window, with her laptop open, but no expression on her face. I'd introduced her as a friend of the family earlier, but everyone knew she wasn't here for pleasantries. We sat in a semicircle, the coffee table acting as the neutral zone. I didn't offer drinks. I thought, I began, voice steady, it was time we all heard from the only person we claimed to be fighting for. I hit play. The living room filled with the shaky but unmistakable voice of my grandmother. The video I'd held on to, the one she recorded just weeks before passing. This house belongs to Rowenna, she said. She's the one who stayed, who listened. I trust her judgment more than anyone's. The silence in the room tightened. Zinnia shifted. Vera's jaw clenched. Before they could speak, the video cut to the second clip, my recording from the market. Zinnia's voice, chipper and smug. Was. Grandma gave it to me before she passed? You must have forgotten. The bracelet glinted on her wrist. Her smile said everything. Uncle Terry exhaled loudly. Aunt Celia looked down at her lap. Vera reached for her purse like she might stand, but Sonia beat her to it. I have a notarized statement from Clara Torres, Sonia said, sliding a printed letter across the table. Grandma's housekeeper for 12 years. In it, she confirms seeing firsthand how Rowenna cared for June daily, and how Vera and Zinnia were verbally dismissive or absent. She also witnessed verbal affirmations of this inheritance. Vera scoffed. You think one dead woman's word and a maid's letter make you untouchable? Sonia folded her hands. No, but it makes your narrative fall apart under scrutiny. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I waited until their squirming quieted, then I leaned forward. I didn't want power. I just wanted peace. But now I know. You only come together when there's something to take. That landed. The words didn't echo. They pierced. Zinnia opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Vera avoided my eyes for the first time in weeks. Celia muttered something about needing to check on the roast and practically ran for the door. Uncle Terry gave me a long look, half resentment, half respect, then followed. They left like they came, without permission, without shame. I stood at the window and watched their car pull away in silence. Sonia stepped beside me, handed over a manila folder. Inside, a subpoena request. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Zinnia's company is under review. Turns out someone else filed that house transfer, from her office. Monday morning arrived like the residue of an explosion. Smoke still hanging, nothing visibly broken, but everything different. I stood at the kitchen counter with my phone pressed to my chest, having just finished reading the first 2 pages of the lawsuit Vera's legal team filed over the weekend. They called it a moral injustice. They accused me of violating familial duty, claiming my inheritance was a result of manipulation and emotional coercion. They asked for court-supervised distribution of the estate, not just the house, but the savings, the land, the assets that had been tied up in that trust for years. It wasn't about fairness. It was about spectacle. A public statement followed, strategically leaked to the local paper by mid-morning. A quote attributed to Vera: "No mother wants to sue her child, but when manipulation poisons a legacy, someone must act." I didn't scream. I didn't even curse. I reread it calmly, then whispered, "They wanted to force guilt into law. I was done playing judge and defendant in their fantasy." By noon, Sonia had already prepared a response. The countersuit would be for malicious prosecution, reputational harm, and defamation. The documentation I'd built for weeks had become our arsenal. "They made this war public," Sonia said, eyes firm across her desk. "Let's show them what exposure really looks like." Later that day, my phone rang again, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail but checked it minutes later. A smooth male voice came through the speaker. Neutral, too friendly. "Hi, Ms. Collins. My name's George. I'm a local mediator. Just wanted to suggest an informal sit-down. Families often resolve these things quietly. Maybe just share a portion, keep the peace. That's what most people do." Most people don't get legally erased by their mothers, George. Still, I didn't respond. Instead, I drove down to the courthouse to submit the motion Sonia had finished drafting. The hallway smelled like old wood and coffee. While I waited in line, a clerk passed by. Sharon, a friend of Vera's from church. She stopped, holding a stack of forms, and leaned in. "Rowenna," she said, lowering her voice. "Look. You know how these things go. Judges don't always look at paperwork. They look at history, relationships, and Vera's got a lot of support." I nodded once. "So do I. Mine just isn't wearing pearls and smiling through court filings." Her mouth opened like she might say something else, then she backed away. Back home, I sat in my study, turned off the lights, and recorded a video journal. Just for me. Just in case I ever needed to remind myself why I did this. "If I ever doubt why I fought, I'll replay this," I whispered to the camera. They didn't just want the house. They wanted the version of me that didn't fight back. By evening, Sonia had filed an evidentiary motion. It included the video of Zinnia at the market, the group chat screenshots, the funeral program that listed me as a distant relative, the flyer with my face scratched out, and now, Vera's public statement. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was burning the paper trail they thought would bury me. The sky outside had turned to iron gray by 7 p.m. I was halfway through folding laundry when my phone lit up again. Sonia. Her voice was different, low, urgent. "Zinnia's firm was just served," she said. "Someone inside flipped." I paused. "What does that mean?" She exhaled, like she'd been holding it in all day. "We have the internal emails, Rowenna. Time-stamped, detailed. They didn't just fake one deed, they faked 3. The envelope Sonia slid across the table was thick, sealed, and yellowed just enough to hint at age. She didn't speak as I opened it, didn't look at me until I pulled the statement out and saw my name printed neatly beside Grandma's. 5 years ago, a joint account. $190 sitting untouched in a credit union I'd never stepped foot in. She opened it the same week she redid her will, Sonia said, folding her hands in front of her. She didn't just name you in a document. She protected you in layers. I stared at the page. The numbers blurred as my throat tightened, not from fear, but from the heartbreak of what it had taken for Grandma to secure my future in silence. She'd known what they would do. She had planned for the worst version of them, even as she invited them to dinner and asked them to call more. She had to hide what she wanted for me, I murmured. That was the only way I could have it. We made copies. Sonia added them to the court file. I drove home in a quiet that didn't feel peaceful, more like the still air before thunder. By late afternoon, the mailbox held a letter with a return address from the IRS. I read it once, then twice. Apparently, someone had submitted a change of address form in my name. Attached was a suspicious property ownership claim for a house I'd never heard of, filed online, with my social security number. I hadn't filed anything. I called Sonia. 20 minutes later, she had her tech contact trace the IP. Zinnia's office, she said. That night, I drove to Phoenix, parked across from her brokerage, and waited. I watched from the driver's seat as Zinnia stepped outside, arms folded, laughing with some blogger holding a phone. The camera clicked. She posed, head tilted, hand on hip. They don't just want to win. They want to smile while they're stealing. I turned the ignition off and sat there a while, watching. Back home, I uploaded every document, bank statements, IP traces, screenshots, and sent them to a journalist friend in Flagstaff. No name, no sender, just, if you're still covering inheritance fraud cases, you'll want to look into Collins and Gold. Start with their Phoenix branch. Then I recorded a voice memo. Let them smile in public. I'll meet them in court. The next day was a blur of scanning, filing, notarizing. Sonia prepared the formal complaint. The tax fraud filing alone could carry weight. But the combination, with the forged deeds, the family smear campaign, the guardianship petition, it painted a much uglier picture. And that was before the knock on Zinnia's door. A process server in a blue shirt and khakis walked into her office that evening. A junior staffer, barely 20 by the look of him, opened the door, took the envelope, and stared at the name on it. By the time I got Sonia's call, the gears were already turning. Zinnia's license just went under review, she said. Her voice didn't sound triumphant, just resolute. And Vera? Silent, I said. Sonia exhaled. Then it's working. 1 week passed, and the silence was louder than any shouting match we'd had in the living room. Zinnia's license had been suspended. Not rumored. Not pending. Officially pulled from the state website. A red banner read, "Under investigation for professional misconduct." I didn't celebrate. I didn't even tell anyone. I just stared at the screen, then closed the tab like I was folding away a chapter I hadn't asked to write. The day Vera's lawsuit was withdrawn, Sonia texted, "Case closed." Quietly, of course. No apology. Of course. They didn't lose because I shouted louder. They lost because I never let them rewrite the truth. That morning, I wandered the house without needing to check the locks. I walked barefoot through the hallways, brushed my fingers along the doorframes Grandma had once painted herself. Every inch of the place felt like mine again, without argument, without permission. In the guest room, tucked inside the old sewing drawer, I found a folded piece of lined paper. Vera's handwriting, unmistakable. You always had Grandma's eyes. And her stubbornness. No signature, just that. I sat on the edge of the bed and read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wasn't sure what she meant to say. Regret? A warning? A compliment disguised as insult? Later that day, Sonia called to ask if I planned to respond, if I wanted to open the door, to reconcile. There's nothing to mend, I told her. There was only ever silence pretending to be peace. She didn't press. I stood in the kitchen afterward, sunlight streaking the tile floor, and whispered to myself, "It's not grief when you walk away from what hurt you. It's clarity." Before sunset, I walked out to the lavender bush behind the house, Grandma's favorite spot. The soil was dry, soft from years of careful tending. I knelt, dug a shallow hole beside the roots, and buried Vera's note. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't want to carry it with me. I wasn't holding on to her words anymore. I was letting them rest. Back inside, I opened my journal and wrote 1 sentence across the top of the page. This isn't about the house anymore. It never really was. That evening, just as I finished washing the dishes, my laptop pinged with a new email. The subject line read, "Cousin from New York." I clicked. "I know what they did to you," it said. "Want to know what they tried with Grandpa's land?" I met Eleanor at a small cafe just outside town. the kind of place with mismatched mugs and two employees who knew your order after the second visit. She hadn't changed much, still wore scarves even in the Arizona heat, still had that restless look in her eyes, like she was already halfway into her next plan. She didn't bother with pleasantries, just slid a folder across the table. Vera tried to do the same thing with Grandpa's land. Different state, different county, but same signatures, same tactics. This one didn't stick either. Inside were scanned documents, falsified power of attorney forms, time-stamped filings from an IP address matching Zinnia's office again. This one, Eleanor tapped a copy of a deed, filed 2 months before he passed, without his knowledge. I didn't ask her why she was showing me now. I knew. Some truths only find their voice when someone else survives the fire first. That night, I compiled the files, Eleanor's documents, the licensing board complaints, everything Sonia and I had gathered, and sent them anonymously to 2 inboxes. One to the same journalist who broke the real estate fraud case, and another to the state licensing board. Subject line: Patterns don't lie, people do. 3 days later, the story went live. Family feud turns legal. Real estate license revoked amid forgery probe. The town whispered louder than ever. But this time, the noise didn't reach my front porch. Not because people weren't talking, but because I wasn't listening. Zinnia's license was officially revoked. Vera's name appeared in county records with a red flag next to suspicious activity under POA. I never heard from either of them again. And that silence? It didn't ache. It felt like breathing. I updated my trust paperwork that week. If anything ever happened to me, the house would go to a nonprofit for caregivers. Not because I was generous, but because no one who broke their back for someone else should be left homeless when the person they loved died. I walked through every room of the house that day, not because I was leaving, but because I'd finally chosen to stay, on my own terms. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped setting tables for people who brought knives. Later that month, I hosted a small gathering in the backyard. Just a few faces from the library, a neighbor who'd always waved, the barista who remembered my name. There was no invitation, no fanfare, just music, iced tea, and sunlight catching on old wind chimes. People didn't call me the girl who got the house anymore. They called me Rowenna, and they saw someone who defended what mattered, without losing herself. Before the sun dipped too low, I walked out back to the lavender bush, Grandma's original one, and knelt beside it. I planted a new bush just beside it, smaller but strong. Beside it, I placed a flat river stone I'd etched by hand. One word: enough. That evening, I curled up on the porch with a cup of chamomile, the kind Grandma used to make when the house went too quiet. I wasn't waiting for anyone, wasn't expecting anything. But then my phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor. I'm thinking of suing them for what they did to Grandpa's land. Want to co-file? I read it once and smiled. Then I deleted it,